October 2nd, 1984. A rectangle of cardboard arrives at independent record stores across America. Inside is an album by 4 musicians from Minneapolis who can't decide if they're geniuses or idiots, and the answer is probably both. The cover shows them sitting on a roof, not Abbey Road, not a mansion. Just 4 guys on the slanted shingles of a house in Minneapolis's uptown neighborhood, the house where 2 of them lived with their mother, who worked the bar shift at a club down the street. The album is called Let It Be, the same title as the Beatles' final album. But this isn't reverence, it's a joke. A middle finger wrapped in a smirk. Inside those grooves, 11 songs, 33 minutes, and the blueprint for what would become alternative rock. But the story doesn't start with an album. It starts 5 years earlier, in a basement, with a 19-year-old delinquent trying to save his little brother from ending up in the same juvenile detention centers he'd just escaped. This is the story of the Replacements. This is the story of Let It Be. And it begins with the sound of breaking glass. 1978. Bob Stinson was 19 years old and already had a resume most people don't accumulate in a lifetime. Abuse survivor, runaway, juvenile detention veteran, and possessor of a guitar technique that seemed to come from another dimension. When he got out of state care and moved back home with his mother Anita in South Minneapolis, he found his 12-year-old half-brother Tommy throwing stones through gas station windows. Bob's solution wasn't counseling, it was a bass guitar. He taught Tommy how to play using Yes's Roundabout and Peter Frampton's Show Me the Way. Within months they had a band called Dog Breath, featuring Bob's high school dropout friend Chris Mars on drums. They'd set up on the roof of the Stinson house and blast covers until the police arrived. Half a mile away, Paul Westerberg was walking home from his job as a janitor in a U.S. senator's office. He heard something through the trees, loud, fast, unhinged. He started hiding in the bushes outside the Stinson basement, listening through the window well. Chris Mars knew Westerberg from around the neighborhood. He invited him to jam. Westerberg showed up, played a few songs, and the next thing anyone knew, the band had a singer, and Westerberg was telling the previous vocalist, "The band doesn't like you." They renamed themselves The Impediments. Their first gig was at a Hazelden Rehab Center sober dance. They showed up completely trashed and drunkenly smashed through Slade and Johnny Thunders covers before being kicked out. The booking agent's parting words, "The Impediments will never play in this town again." So they changed their name to The Replacements. Westerberg brought ambition and songs. Bob brought fearless, searing guitar work that critics would later describe as beatifically fucked up. Tommy, still a kid, brought an engine room bass attack. And Mars provided the metronomic backbone that kept their chaos from becoming noise. Bob Stinson described them perfectly. 4 idiots on stage trying to one-up each other. But Westerberg realized something crucial early on. If it doesn't rock enough, Bob will scoff at it, and if it isn't catchy enough, Chris won't like it, and if it isn't modern enough, Tommy won't like it. His toughest audience was the band itself. Peter Jesperson was a Beatles fanatic who ran Or Folk Jokopus, a record store packed with punk and new wave imports from New York and London. He also DJ'd at Jay's Longhorn, where touring acts like the Ramones and Blondie played alongside local bands trying to build something from nothing. In 1980, Westerberg handed Jesperson a demo tape. Jesperson loved what he heard. He became their manager, champion, and co-founder of Twin Tone Records, the indie label that would release their first albums. "We were there super early and did a lot to help it develop," Jesperson later recalled. The label was almost forced into being by the sheer number of good bands in the area. The Replacements released Sorry Ma, Forgot to Take Out the Trash in 1981, 18 songs in 37 minutes of raw, furious punk. Then came the 8-track hardcore assault Stink in 1982. But by 1983's Hootenanny, something was shifting. Westerberg was writing differently. He'd penned an acoustic ballad called "You're Getting Married One Night" and played it for the band. Silence. Bob Stinson finally said, "Save that for your solo album, Paul. That ain't the Replacements." The track went unreleased. But Westerberg knew they couldn't stay loud and fast forever. Playing that kind of noisy, fake hardcore rock was getting us nowhere, and it wasn't a lot of fun, he later admitted. This was the first time I had songs that we arranged rather than just banging out riffs and giving them titles. The Replacements had started antagonizing punk audiences by playing terrible covers. The DeFranco Family, anything designed to piss off the kids who thought punk had rules about being fast and wearing black. So we'd play the DeFranco Family, that kind of shit, just to piss them off, Westerberg said. Now he was ready to write songs that actually meant something. Late 1983, early 1984, the Replacements entered a warehouse in Roseville, Minnesota, later identified as Blackberry Way Studios, to record their next album. The space was freezing. Twin Tone co-founder Steve Fjellstad engineered. The band initially wanted REM's Peter Buck to produce, and Buck did visit Athens, Georgia with them, but they didn't have enough material ready. Buck stuck around long enough to contribute one crucial element. Westerberg wrote in stops and starts. It took several sessions to finish the album. Unlike their previous records, which captured spontaneous punk chaos, these songs were actually arranged, thought out, built. The album began with "I Will Dare," a jangly, optimistic burst that felt like doors opening. Peter Buck played the chiming guitar solo. Westerberg picked up a mandolin for the first time, adding it to the bridge. The song was about taking a chance, maybe on someone younger, maybe on yourself. Meet me any place or anywhere or anytime. Now I don't care. Meet me tonight. If you will dare, I will dare. Then came Favorite Thing, where Westerberg's hiccuping vocals celebrated the band itself. Yeah, I know, I look like hell. I smoke and I drink and I'm feeling swell. Androgynous was unlike anything they'd done. Built around an out-of-tune piano and a shaker, telling the story of Dick wearing a skirt and Jane sporting a chain, celebrating gender fluidity in 1984 when few dared touch the subject. Unsatisfied became the album's raw emotional center. Just 4 minutes of existential howling, Westerberg on lap steel guitar, screaming, "Look me in the eye and tell me that I'm satisfied." Music critic Karen Schomer later called it a song where everything you dream of is right in front of you, and everything is a lie. 16 Blue captured teenage isolation with brutal accuracy. Your age is the hardest age. Everything just drags and drags. Answering Machine was Paul alone with an acoustic guitar, confronting modern loneliness. How do you say "I miss you" to an answering machine? They covered Kiss's Black Diamond, playing it completely straight. An uncool band played with total commitment by punk kids. And they threw in joke songs like "Gary's Got a Boner" and "Tommy Gets His Tonsils Out," reminders they were still the same idiots who'd piss off audiences for fun. When it came time to title the album, the band had gone through several ideas. Whistler's Mammy, then Stunk. Then they made a decision. Whatever song came on the radio next would be the title. The Beatles' "Let It Be" started playing. The joke was perfect. Here were 4 nobodies from Minneapolis naming their indie album after one of the most famous albums in history. Peter Jesperson, their Beatles-obsessed manager, would hate it, which made it even better. Our way of saying that nothing is sacred, Westerberg explained. That the Beatles were just a fine rock and roll band. We were seriously gonna call the next record "Let It Bleed." For the cover, photographer Daniel Corrigan shot them sitting on the roof of Bob and Tommy's mother's house. The same house where they'd rehearsed in the basement, the house across from the uptown bar where their mom worked. Music critic Michael Azerrad called it a great little piece of myth-making, with each member's personality visible in how they sat. Twin Tone Records released Let It Be on October 2nd, 1984. The label had minimal resources for marketing. No MTV videos, no major label muscle, just organic growth, college radio, and word of mouth. Within weeks, something extraordinary started happening. Robert Christgau at The Village Voice gave it an A+. Rolling Stone's Debbie Miller called it a brilliant rock and roll album with an amazing range. Bruce Pavitt wrote that it was mature, diverse rock that could well shoot these regional boys into the national mainstream. The Village Voice's annual Paz and Job Critics poll, the most influential year-end list in music, ranked Let It Be as the fourth best album of 1984. Christgau personally ranked it second. In 1989, Rolling Stone would place it at number 15 on their list of the 100 greatest albums of the 1980s. By his decade-end assessment, Christgau declared that Let It Be, along with X's Wild Gift, represented the peak of American indie rock. But here's what mattered more than critics. Let It Be became a soundtrack for an entire generation. Colin Meloy of the Decemberists later wrote, "I listened to Let It Be endlessly. The record seemed to encapsulate perfectly all of the feelings that were churning inside me. The album wasn't about one thing. It zigged and zagged between sincerity and stupidity, between heartbreak and humor, between punk chaos and pop perfection. And that's exactly why it connected. Because growing up doesn't happen in straight lines." Music journalist Elizabeth Nelson nailed it in the 2025 Deluxe reissue liner notes. In form and function, The Replacements were the ultimate rebuke to masculine punk, and Let It Be, at its core, is a record for girls. It's also a record for the terminally shy and for anyone who ever felt like a freak in their own skin. 1984 was an extraordinary year for Minneapolis music. Prince released Purple Rain in July, a film and soundtrack that would sell over 13 million copies. Husker Du dropped their double album Zen Arcade in July, a hardcore punk concept album that shattered every rule about what punk could be. And in October came Let It Be. For a brief moment, Minneapolis wasn't just cold, it was the center of the American music universe. The Village Voice's year-end poll put 3 Minneapolis albums in the top 10. Prince's Purple Rain, Husker Du's Zen Arcade, and The Replacements' Let It Be. Major labels started circling. Sire Records signed The Replacements in 1985. They recorded Tim, their first album with a bigger budget, a professional producer, ex-Ramones drummer Tommy Ramone, and Real Expectations. But success brought fractures. Bob Stinson's drinking and drug use had always been part of the band's chaos. But as they entered the major label world, his unpredictability became a liability. He'd skip recording sessions to work shifts as a cook. He'd show up late or not at all. During Tim sessions, producer Tommy Ramone had to piece together Bob's guitar parts from fragments recorded in just one day. In 1986, before they recorded Pleased to Meet Me, the band fired Bob. The stated reason: his substance abuse made him too unreliable. But there's a darker story. Bob had briefly gotten sober, completing a court-ordered rehab program after hitting his wife. He'd been clean for 3 weeks. According to multiple sources, including Bob's wife Carlene, before a series of entry shows in Minneapolis, Westerberg allegedly took a bottle of champagne to Bob and said, "Either take a drink, motherfucker, or get off my stage." Bob drank. He never stopped again. Bob felt that no one liked him unless he was drunk. Carlene told Spin in 1993. Tommy Stinson, Bob's little brother, the kid Bob had saved from juvenile detention by putting a bass in his hands, sided with Westerberg. The band became a trio, bringing in guitarist Slim Dunlap to replace Bob. Bob Stinson formed other bands, Model Prisoner, Static Taxi, Shotgun Rationale, but never escaped his demons. On February 18, 1995, at age 35, he died from organ failure. Alcoholic liver disease. His heart gave up, his brother Tommy later said, because he was tired. The Replacements continued until 1991, releasing Pleased to Meet Me, 1987, Don't Tell a Soul, 1989, and All Shook Down, 1990. But the spark was gone. Westerberg increasingly controlled the direction. Chris Mars left in 1990. They played their final show on July 4, 1991, in Chicago. Bob Stinson never got to see what his band became. He never saw them reunite in 2012. He never knew that I Will Dare would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. Let It Be didn't sell millions. It never went platinum. The Replacements never had a hit single. They never became the next R.E.M. or U2. But they created something more important than success: influence. Without the Replacements, there's no Pixies responding to want ads looking for bassists into Peter, Paul and Mary and Husker Du. Without the Replacements, Kurt Cobain doesn't have a model for mixing punk aggression with pop melody and emotional vulnerability. Without the Replacements, there's no Uncle Tupelo, no Whiskey Town, no Wilco, no Ryan Adams, no entire alternative country movement. When Let It Be appeared in 1984, it showed a generation of musicians that punk could mature without selling out, that you could be sincere without being serious, that messiness and melody weren't opposites. They were partners. The album charted a course between hardcore punk's rigid rules and arena rock's corporate bloat. It was indie rock before indie rock had a name. It was alternative before alternative had a definition. It was emo before emo existed. Rolling Stone currently ranks Let It Be at number 156 on their 500 greatest albums of all time list. Pitchfork placed it at number 29 on their 100 best albums of the 1980s. Spin magazine ranks it number 12 on their 25 greatest albums of all time. Period. In 2019, the current owners of the Stinson House, the one on the album cover, installed a stained glass window reproducing the Let It Be cover photograph. The house itself became a shrine. In 2025, Rhino Records released a deluxe edition of Let It Be, newly remastered, with unreleased outtakes including tracks called Street Girl and Who's Gonna Take Us Alive, alternate versions of Androgynous and Favorite Thing, and a complete 28-song live performance from March 1984 at Chicago's Cubby Bear. Music journalist Elizabeth Nelson wrote in the liner notes, "Let It Be is the blueprint for what so many of us wanted and needed rock and roll to be. A refuge, a provocation, a middle finger, and a way out. That's the album's power. It didn't create a genre. It created permission. Permission to be contradictory. Permission to fail spectacularly. Permission to write a song about saying goodnight to an answering machine and have it mean something. 4 idiots on stage trying to one-up each other recorded 11 songs in a freezing warehouse, named the album as a joke, put themselves on a roof for the cover, and accidentally created the template for every indie rock band that followed." Paul Westerberg was 23 when they recorded it. Tommy Stinson was 16. They had no idea what they'd made. Let It Be is a masterpiece of imperfection. It's sloppy and sublime, stupid and profound, drunk and devastatingly sober all at once. It's the sound of growing up wrong in a world that demands you grow up right. 41 years later, it still sounds like the future. Because the truth is, we're all unsatisfied. We're all 16 blue. We're all just trying to dare someone to dare us back. And the Replacements understood that better than anyone.